how different it will be when Jesus comes again. When Jesus came the first time, there was no room for Him in the inn. But when He comes again, He will inherit the earth for His kingdom. When He came the first time, He rode into Jerusalem on a lowly donkey. But when He comes again, He will descend out of heaven on a white steed at full gallop and will come back to this earth as a conquering general. When He came the first time, He wore a crown of thorns. But when He comes again, He will have many diadems upon His head in a show of strength and sovereignty. When He came the first time, He came as a lowly bondservant. But when He comes again, He will be a bold sovereign. He came the first time to redeem. When He comes again, He will reign. He came the first time to a cross. When He comes again, He will come to a coronation and to a crown. At His first coming, He was executed. At His second coming, He will be exalted as King of kings and Lord of lords. At His first coming, He stood before Pilate. At His second coming, Pilate will stand before Him. Satan will be thrown into hell. Sin will be punished. Christ will be enthroned. Wrong will be dethroned. Right will be rewarded. All of this dramatic change will be ushered in at the time of the second coming. And how we should long for this day to come to planet Earth. We are not waiting for the second coming of Jesus Christ for the Lord to begin to reign. He is reigning this very moment at the right hand of God the Father.
What is going on? Grace and peace, everyone. This is episode 41 of Ransacked and Reformed. I believe I'm correct. You can check me in the comments.
Yeah.
41. Daryl, the host. We got Mark Ryan in the house, co-host, and we got Pastor Michael tonight talking about historic pre-mill. I'm excited. I'm extremely excited. And Mark, thank you again, always, for the sermon jam that pumped me up already. So yeah. I'm very excited to hear my guest tonight and just to dive in. We let the on-mill position come on. We let post-mill come on.
They had their chance to present and everything, and yeah.
That's right, man. So how you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I thought you was talking to me.
Oh,
go ahead, Mark.
Oh, I'm good. Every day is a good day when you have a beard. So,
Yeah, we were talking about that a little bit before Pastor Michael came in. And I'm not quite there yet, I had a friend of mine. He came and looked at one of our shows and he was like, "Who's Duck Dynasty?"
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
You must not watch my show, bro. That's my man Mark. But Pastor Michael, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, man. And my beard is a facade. It's very, very patchy, but it gets long and curly, so it looks thicker than it is. But I'm doing great.
Gotcha. So is that Brother Martin? He said so. Today is the day, Mark.
I am historic pre-mill
yes.
with a heavy dose of that optimism and all that. And sometimes Greg DeMar haunts me in my sleep. I'll just leave it, leave it there.
Yeah, I think we'll touch on that a little bit. But yeah, we bumped into Pastor Michael from Eschatology Matters. Shouts out to them. Great brothers. I don't know how I bumped into the conference, but I did. And I was just like, wait a second, what is this? And then it was just everybody presenting. And then Pastor Michael did his thing. I was like, let's go. I sent it to Mark. He was like, oh, yeah. So, yeah, and it's been since last September. So shouts out to Eschatology Matters. And thank you all for your contribution to the kingdom of God. And Pastor Michael, thank you for your presentation as well, brother.
Yeah, I'm glad to do it. And it was a lot of fun. Those guys over at Eschatology Matters are doing a great work. Right now, I think that they're putting out work that is not found anywhere else, where they have a platform for all the different views.
Yeah.
And so, and they're actually showing a lot of the cohesiveness between the views. So that's a valuable work they're doing. I'm really, really excited to see what's in the future for them.
Awesome. So yeah, we're gonna dive in. Pastor Michael, quickly, if you could just give like a 90-second quick little testimony, and then what you currently do now, if you would like, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so I come from the hills of East Tennessee, and born and raised up just south of Knoxville, up in the hills. And so that's Southern Baptist country. If you're not Southern Baptist, you're just lost. I was not raised really in a Christian household. We were what we might consider culturally Christian. You said you're Christian because that's what everybody else is, but practically not a lot of religious fervor in any sense at all. And I actually went to a church to make fun of it. I was running around with a cousin of mine who was an atheist, and I was more essentially an atheist. And he asked me to go visit this little church out in the woods where they had a screaming preacher. And he was like, "It's hilarious. You got to come see this screaming preacher." And so we'd go out there and we'd like laugh and like hack and, amen or whatever from the back of the church. And when they'd have altar calls, we found out really quickly it was taboo to leave the church while somebody was down at the altar. And so we would go down to the altar together and just talk about what we were going to get to eat after or whatever, like praying, we'd be like on the altar like that. But we like, you want to go to Burger King or you want to go to a cookout or whatever. And we'd be there for like 30 minutes, 40 minutes down there at the altar, just so that nobody could leave. Because we were just curious, how long will they stay here? Just kind of making a mockery of it. And my cousin got bored of it after like 2 weeks. And he was like, it's fun, but I'm not going to go wait through. We at least had to go through the sermon to get to that. And there was something about it. I was like, I think I'm going to keep going. And so I asked one of the deacons there to start giving me a ride. And he gave me a ride, and I ended up attending. And I never really went through the process of like pray and ask Jesus into your heart. There was some moment, I don't remember, in that year when I must have become a Christian because something changed. And so I became a Christian at some point during that year. And it got to the point where I actually went to the youth pastor and I said, what kind of schooling do you have to get to go be a pastor? And of course, we were like independent fundamental Baptist. He was like, "You don't got to get no schooling, son. You and let God take over, And I was like, "All right, that sounds like my kind of thing, So I was 11 years old and started preaching. And when you're the kid preacher, everybody wants to hear you. And so I started preaching all over. And I mean, literally, I was preaching in Montana. I was preaching in Kentucky and Georgia, Louisiana. Like I was preaching all over, and especially all over the hills of East Tennessee. And I got voted in to pastor my first church the week before my 16th birthday.
Wow.
And I pastored there for 3 years and graduated and went to college. And now I've been out at my church for the last 4 years. I'm senior pastor out here in Lewisburg, Kentucky at a little church called Antioch Baptist. And it's been a ride. I wouldn't recommend voting in a pastor that young. I would not recommend putting an 11-year-old in the pulpit. But it was how God has designed my path to bring me to where I am. So I'm appreciative of it.
Amen. That's awesome. That is awesome. That is awesome. Wow. Yeah, that's great. So we got a Presbyterian in the house. We got a Reformed Pentecostal in the house, and then we got a Baptist in the house. So this is awesome. This is great.
What are we? We're missing some Methodists,
Yeah, exactly.
And actually, we've got a lot of Christian YouTubers kind of in our group, over the years. I don't know that we have any Methodists really that I can think of that's in, that we fellowship with.
Man, I don't think so. I know, in another group that I'm in, I know one of them is quasi Lutheran. It's quasi. I would say quasi Lutheran, but I don't think Methodist. So we got to do a little bit of hunting.
We
definitely got to do a little bit of hunting.
We're coming for you. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Brother Martin asked the question in the chat here. Mark, optimist optimistic historic premill. Do you think Charles Spurgeon held that?
Yeah, yeah. And you go to read what Spurgeon, and you probably read quite a bit of Spurgeon and his thoughts on eschatology by chance, Michael, or?
Yeah, and he didn't write a ton compared to other guys.
Yeah.
He generally didn't concern himself with eschatology all that much, but I have read a bit of what he wrote. Yeah.
Mhm.
Gotcha.
And I'm curious to do more, just listen to his thoughts on the Olivet discourse, because I've heard differing opinions and I guess interpretations of what he believed there. So,
Well, I'm definitely not an expert on Spurgeon. I've spent a lot more time reading Gill, which of course they're directly related. He's his predecessor, but from what I'm understanding, at least from the question, I mean, they're asking if you personally hold to the view that Charles Spurgeon had, which was optimistic historic premill. And
okay.
as far as I understand, that view is a lot like postmill, that the gospel will be effective and spread throughout the world, and there will be this ultimate event in the last day where there's a falling away or some sort of a almost tribulation-esque kind of event that undermines that, but the gospel has been ultimately effective. Is that what you would hold to?
That's what I would hold to. In, you know, it will take the return of the Lord Jesus Christ to usher in this golden millennium. That's what I would hold to, is it takes his physical, and I think that's what Spurgeon held to as well. It will take Christ's physical return to usher that in. But before that, very optimistic, as opposed to, and I think we're going to get into the difference between dispensational and historic premill. I would lean heavily optimistic, you know.
Yeah. So I want to give the floor to Pastor Michael. So explain to everybody that's watching 90-foot view. What is 90,000-foot view? What is historic premill? If you had to give it like a timeline, and then how it differs from dispensational historic, no, dispensational premill.
Premill. Yeah. So you would definitely have to take a 90,000-foot view if you're used to hearing dispensationalism. The historic premill timeline will sound rather similar, but it's much wider. For the most part, historic premillennialists don't believe in a 7-year tribulation period the way that a dispensationalist would. By and large, most historic premillennialists believe that the period between the resurrection of Christ and the second coming of Christ are the tribulation period. So when you're reading the Olivet discourse and he talks about a great tribulation, most historic premill guys believe that that encompasses all of the inter-advent period. And so our timeline would be something along the lines of death, burial, resurrection of Christ, tribulation, difficulty, hardship for the church, and then the second coming. You can work in there different things. There are individuals in the view that believe in a literal figure, a person called the Antichrist, who's going to come in the last day and, in a sense, reenact what happened in 70 AD. There are other people that don't believe that. They believe that the spirit of Antichrist is all through that age, and we engage it in different generations. There's some very prominent people that would believe that. That's all flexible, but generally you have death, burial, resurrection of Christ, a time of hardship for the church that has now spanned 2,000 years, and then the second coming of Christ. Of course, as premillennialist, then you have the introduction of this millennial reign. And a lot of people don't know this, but in the historic premill camp, there's a lot of flexibility on whether or not that is literally 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of historic premillennialists that believe that 1,000 is a symbolic number representing just a complete or maybe expansive or extensive period of time and not literally 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's completely welcome within the camp as well. Whether it's literally 1,000 or not, you have the millennial reign, and then generally most everybody in the camp holds to one major judgment in the end. Not 7 judgments, I believe, as dispensationalists hold, and then we're in the eternal state. So that's probably all very familiar to a dispensationalist. It's just much more spread out.
Yeah. So, you know, I can disappear anytime and my clothes will just drop. So in the historic pre-mill world, and explain the rapture and the second coming. Expound on that a little bit.
Yeah, so that for a dispensationalist, the rapture occurs either 7 or 3.5 years prior to the second coming. Unless you're post-trib. There is such a thing as a post-trib dispensationalist. There's quite a few of them, but it's definitely not the mainstream.
Yep.
But for a historic premillennialist and an amillennialist and a postmillennialist, the rapture and the second coming are the same event. That's why you'll never really hear an amill or a postmill guy use the word rapture. They'll just say the second coming.
Yep.
But they believe in a rapture. It's just the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So when Christ returns in the historic premill view, the believers are caught up to be with him, and then and you have to use this analogy. It's going to get worn out eventually, but it is the analogy. Just like how the citizens would come out to greet a Roman general returning in triumph and welcome him into their town or their city, the Christians have gone up to welcome Christ into his world that he's triumphing into, glorious like a conquering hero. And so we go up into the air to welcome him and bring him back with us to the world that he's to rule on.
Amen. Amen. Brother Mark had Martin had a question here. Matthew 24:14. I could pull it up if
I've got a Bible here. I had a feeling we were going to go directly to the Olivet discourse. Yeah.
Yeah. We could do that. All right. Yeah, I got it up here. I'll share it on the screen. Let me share it. Yeah.
Oh, we'll probably talk about that a lot now. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Of course. And let me change to everybody.
While you're doing that, I'm actually going to shut this door because I've got a door that's swinging and it's going to distract me.
It's all good. It's all good. All right. Here we go. Boom. 24:14. All right. Let's dive into the word. Boom. All right. 24:14. All right. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So
you want to get the context? You want me to go up some more or down some more?
Well, I mean, not necessarily. That's actually part of Jesus names off 9 things that are going to happen prior to his return, or at least prior to this next event. Because he finishes that by saying, then the end will come. The first 8 things that he describes are things that are negative. And he even says that some of them are not signs that the end is about to occur. Then he gets to the end there. He gives this last sign, which is the only positive sign, which is that the gospel will be preached throughout the whole world. That wording there, preached throughout the whole world is actually one Greek word. And it's the same Greek word that Paul uses later in some of his writings. And he actually says that the gospel has been preached throughout the whole world in his day. And so my position on the whole Olivet discourse, by and large, up until we get to about verse 28, would be that those things, I'm perfectly comfortable with the reality that those could be already fulfilled. Those could have already happened at 70 AD. But I'm also emphatic, my personal view, which is also the view of most historic premillennialists, is that what happened in 70 AD is a precursor. And so you get this concept of what's called double fulfillment, where a prophecy is given, it's immediately fulfilled, and then it's fulfilled much later again. And so when I read the Olivet Discourse, I'm completely comfortable with the reality that that's already been done at 70 AD, but that it will be fulfilled in a greater context in the last day. And so when Jesus says the gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, then the end will come. And Paul says, yeah, that's happened. And then in 70 AD, you have this cataclysmic event. I think that what Jesus is setting up is actually the, what would we say? The possibility that he could come back at any time. There's a word for that. The imminent return, the possibility. Yeah. The imminence of his return. So since that was the reality in Paul's day, it was just as possible for Paul's day as the medieval age, as our age, that Jesus could return at any moment, because he had said that, and that was fulfilled in a sense back then. If you're a futurist, you might be waiting for it to occur in a greater sense in the future. If you're a preterist, you might be content that it's already happened. And that's all completely compatible with historic premill. But I advocate for double fulfillment, which is that this is something that did happen in 70 AD, but in a much smaller way than it's going to happen in the future.
So, well, you know, in Matthew 25, you have Jesus Christ judging the nation, separating the sheep from the goats. And to have more unity there, it makes more sense for me, you know, because Matthew 25, we wouldn't interpret it, well, that was just the world at that time. That would be that'd be every nation in the history of the world. And so there's some consistency there. That's my more response to say, no, it all happened in 70 AD and nothing further, nothing beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I struggle with the concept that everything in this has been fulfilled, predominantly because Jesus says at one point, it's going to be worse than it will ever be in history ever again. And we talked about this a little bit at the Eschatology Matters conference, where, if you're a preterist, you read that and you go, oh, yeah, because the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD was the worst thing that ever happened. And it's like, no, it's not. It's not. It's really, really not. I don't know if you've read much history, but it's really, really not. Way worse things have happened. And so there's definitely something, I'm with you there, where it's like, no, there is a real reality where some of this stuff just doesn't line up with 70 AD. I'm with you there.
Yeah. Now, so there's a question from Brandon, Eschatology Matters. What's going on, brother? So would you allow for a partial preterist view of some of the Olivet discourse?
Yeah, definitely. There's actually a point, and I don't know for then. Let me see. All the way down to verse 21. Mm-hmm. Verse 20, pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. I've actually run into historic premillennialists that make a pretty consistent and compelling argument that the gap is between verses 20 and 21, that there's a 2,000-year gap or plus between verse 20 and verse 21. So they say all the way down to verse 20 was 70 AD. Verse 21 forward, when he introduces this concept of great tribulation, that's a future event. And that would be pretty inclusive of partial preterism, and I think that's a difficult case to make, that there's a 2,000-year gap between these two verses and no real sign of that in the text. But I'm open to that. I think that's fine.
Yeah. So, question: were you ever dispensationalist?
No, yeah. There's a question and answer with R.C. Sproul where one person says, would you go back to being pre-trib if such and such happened? And he said, the next time I'm pre-trib will be the first time I'm pre-trib. And so there's probably, when, like I said before we were on the air, when I started preaching, I was 11 years old. There's probably been a time in my life when I preached something like pre-trib just because I was mimicking the guys that I was coming up under.
Yeah.
But as long as I've understood what I was talking about, I've never really been pre-trib. And mostly because of what we find in verse 29 there in Matthew 24. So this is a big disp chapter. Dispensationalists love the Olivet discourse as a last days prophecy. But in verse 29, Jesus says immediately after the tribulation of those days, and then he starts talking about his return. And there's no rapture. And even heavy metal dispies like John Walvoord would say, yeah, he doesn't talk about the rapture. And so when I'm coming up in dispy churches, I'm like, he didn't talk about it. What are you talking about? Like, this is the most important thing for us to know. Like, how could Jesus be like, oh yeah, here's what's going to happen in the last days, and then just conveniently not talk about the most important thing for us to know as believers? And so I was never sold on that. We'd go to 1 Thessalonians 4 and other big time dispy passages.
Mhm.
And I was always just like, yeah, I don't think so. I don't think that says what you think it says.
Right.
So no, I've never actually, as long as I've understood what I was saying,
Sure.
I've never been pre-trib, and Dispy includes a lot more than that, but just on the eschatology side. No.
So generally, dispensationalists, they will believe in the secret left behind kind of rapture, and then they would be pre-trib, as opposed to historic mill would not believe in that secret rapture, and they'd be generally post-trib. Is that fair to say then?
Yeah, because it's a very rare thing to find a historic premillennialist that even believes in a 7-year tribulation. That's the thing to keep in mind, is that if you believe that the whole inter-advent period is the tribulation, it would be virtually impossible to be pre-trib, because that would mean that the rapture had to happen before the resurrection of Christ, which is silly. So yeah, to be post-trib and to believe in a very public event that's seen by everybody, that's almost a necessary requirement of being historic premill. Yeah.
And are there any other major differences then between the two different positions then, or?
Yeah, so most all historic premillennialists are covenantal, which means that we don't believe, well, this is get into a very long discussion, but the covenantalism is the covenant of redemption, the covenant of works, the covenant of grace. And we believe that the covenant of works ended with Adam. We've been under the covenant of grace ever since. And so the whole Old Testament, the idea of the sacrificial system being reinstituted in the last day, Jesus, if Hebrews seems to make abundantly clear to me that Jesus did away with the sacrificial system, that will never again be accepted. So the idea of God ever accepting or ordaining the sacrifices again seems like something that we could never accept. So yeah, there's some pretty big differences. Now, there is the new trend in dispensationalism that they're calling progressive dispensationalism, that they really should just call MacArthurism, because he's the only guy that's ever taught it, and the only people that believe it are people that have come up under John MacArthur. And so, they used to call dispensationalism Darbyism. They might as well call progressive dispensationalism MacArthurism.
Yeah.
But that is yet to be seen how that's going to play out, because I believe he's covenantalist, but the way that works with dispensationalism, at least to me, is not very clear. Yeah. So the concept of how God has saved people throughout time, that would be a little different. The reinstitution of sacrifices, the reconstitution of the nation of Israel as the chosen people of God in the last day, all of that would be, I wouldn't say necessarily foreign. It doesn't have to be extracted, but most historic premillennialists would never believe any of that stuff.
Yeah. So why is it called historic premill? Why is it called historic premill?
Yeah, so I love the term historic premill. It used to be called classical premillennialism, but I guess people didn't like that. I actually like historic premill because it explains exactly what we are. We're historical because there's no arguing here. It's the oldest view in the church. It's the oldest eschatological view in the church. It doesn't matter who you read, whether it's Irenaeus or Polycarp or Papias or Justin Martyr. You read the early church, they believed at least a close variant of this, if not explicitly this. And that seems to be because they were taught that. Irenaeus and Clement of Rome, those guys were probably disciples of the Apostle Paul. Polycarp was a disciple of John. Papias was a disciple of him. These guys were getting their eschatology directly from the apostles, and this just so happened to be what they believed. And so this is the historic view. It goes all the way back. It's called premillennialism because it's exactly that. It's pre-mill. And so that's why it's called that. It's the oldest view, and it's pre-mill.
Amen. Amen. Awesome. That's great.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we don't have all day, but share some old historic pre-mill theologians and stuff, because it's shocking how many there are historically and then throughout the ages as well.
Yes.
Yeah, and
scholars you can name off top.
Well, yeah, if you've not seen my speech from Eschatology Matters, I take about 10 minutes of that to name off about probably 40 guys that everybody should know that were historic premill. I just found out last month that Herschel York is historic premill. And if you don't know who that is, he's the dean of preaching at Southern Seminary. He's been there for, I think, 30 years. He's a very respected academic and a very respected professor of preaching, and he's historic premill. And just for such a question, I happen to just have these because I thought that it might come up. So if people are looking for good books or literature on historic premillennialism, the oldie but the goodie is George Eldon Ladd. He's rock solid on just about everything that he ever said. And this is his commentary on Revelation. It's exemplary. One book that you can't find very easily that's going to cost you a little bit more is J. Barton Payne. J. Barton Payne wrote a book called The Encyclopedia of Biblical Prophecy. The man goes through every single prophecy in the Bible and tells either where it was fulfilled, and he cross-references it with other scriptures, or he tells how that it might be fulfilled in the future. He's historic premill. So that's a book that every preacher should have. Herschel York actually said that he became historic premill because he read George Eldon Ladd's Theology of the New Testament. Okay. He lays out, if you've ever heard the concept of an eschatology that was already not yet.
Yes, sir.
That comes, well, he didn't create it by any means, but it was definitely popularized by George Eldon Ladd. He was the guy that really put that out there, and it was a theology of the New Testament that really pushed that view to the forefront. And now virtually everybody believes that except dispensationalists.
Yeah. And that's one thing that really got me into, that really struck me that, hey, I go to Assembly of God Church, all my friends really dispensational. But I had in my mind for the longest time, hey, we're waiting for Jesus Christ to come back and to begin his rule and reign. When, years ago, I heard Steve Lawson preaching, we're not waiting for Jesus Christ to return to begin to reign. He's reigning right now at the right hand of God the Father. That just blew my mind. And it changes how you live too. And in your perspective on things. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Second book, real quick, Pastor Michael. The second book you showed, the encyclopedia, please.
It's called The Encyclopedia of Biblical Prophecy by J. Barton Payne.
All right. Awesome.
Yeah, that's a fantastic reference tool. You're not going to read it like a book because it's 700 pages, but it's a great reference tool. I've got two more. I'm not going to do this forever, but Robert Mounce's commentary on the book of Revelation. This is in the New International Commentary of the New Testament. Fantastic. He's historic premill. Fantastic commentary on Revelation there. And then you've actually got this one over your shoulder, Mark, but Grudem, good old Grudem. He was the big one that wrote the systematic theology. He's historic premill, and so I think he does a really good job of laying all that out. So that's just a few great books that I would recommend to everybody that's interested in learning about historic premill, or historic premill guys out there that are looking for. They said, I met a guy at a conference in Bowling Green last year after the eschatology conference, and he had seen the video, and he was like, man, I'm so glad you're out here. The historic premill community's been waiting for their guy to, start writing again and start preaching again. And I thought, man, there's so many of us out here that are writing and preaching. You just don't know where to find them.
Sure, right.
And so, yeah, it's a great thing. Now, I have to say, Mark, you were talking about the fact that the already not yet system blew your mind. I love to use this analogy because everybody thinks that if you believe that Jesus is already reigning in a sense, but we're waiting for this ultimate reign, a lot of people think that that's just automatically an Amil view. Mm-hmm. And when people heard my speech at the Eschatology Matters conference, a lot of people said, even Brandon Wood's wife, Danielle, she said, Michael's pretty much Amil. Like she said, she was like, he's pretty much Amil. And it's hilarious to me when people say that, because it's like saying Michael Jordan played a lot like Kobe. It's like, no, you've got it backwards.
Come on,
Kobe played a lot like Michael Jordan. He stole all his moves. So when you say, Michael, you sound Amil, I'm like, there's a reason for that. You stole all our moves. You took everything we believe and then just threw Revelation 20 away and then called it a new view.
Yes.
No, like we came up with all that. Like, So that's really how I feel about it. Is like we did all this work, and then all millennialists came in and just said it was theirs. Like,
Yeah, we'll reference, we'll tag Eschatology Matters in the comments, and we'll definitely reference your video because it was just great. Brother Martin has a question. When will the return? Oh, yeah, that's a whole nother. The bat signal's going off for you to return to Eschatology Matters. That's a whole nother bag of worms. A whole nother bag of worms. Life just hit hard. So
yeah. No, I mean, I'm glad to spend just a second talking about that because it wasn't like some sort of a conflict.
Yeah.
I teach at Forge Theological Seminary, and I took on a second job, well, a third job because I'm a pastor. But I just started working for the Holy Scriptures Bible Society as an editor. We're producing another version of the Bible, an English version. And so between pastoring full time and working at the seminary and editing this new version of the Bible, putting those videos together, even if they're just 3 to 5 minute videos, doesn't seem like a lot, but it takes me an hour to record that because I stammer and stutter. And then, of course, I want to edit and do all this stuff. And so it was just something that I was happy to be a part of. And those guys are going to do fantastic work. And it honestly was a hard thing for me to step away from because I told them I feel like I am selling Google stock in like 1996. Like you don't understand how much they're going to do in the future. And for me to not be a part of it was a big detriment to myself, but just couldn't devote the time that I needed to. But I look forward to seeing what Josh Howard and Brandon Wood, and I know they've got other guys. Tim, I can't say his name right. Bouchon,
yeah,
he's a great guy. I love meeting all of those guys at the conference, and they're going to do great work. I look forward to everything that they're putting out. But I would love to have been a part of it. I just couldn't devote the time to it. So
it's all good. But yeah. Thank you. So is there, Mark always says, Gary DeMar, like, keeps him up at night sometimes. So is there any
before I go to bed, I check under my bed for Gary DeMar so I don't have nightmares, right? Are there any texts or arguments from Amill folks or postmill folks, that keep you up at night sometimes or that haunt you in your sleep? Anything like that?
Well, I'm more prone to slide postmill than I am Amill these days. Because for me, the difference between me and an amillennialist is essentially Revelation 20. And so if I'm willing to step across the aisle on Revelation 20, I might as well be postmill because the argument that those guys have to me is so much more compelling. I've got a buddy just a town over that he's a big hashtag dat postmill guy. He loves he lives and breathes it. Yeah. I mean, he just called me this last week and he was like, I got to ask you, do you have a problem with theonomy? Because people can't seem to hate theonomy. And I'm like, you postmill guys, you're all the same. You're all the same. But the thing that's so compelling with postmillennialism is the optimism of it. It really is. Like you want to believe it so bad. It's like, man, if this really went the way that you're saying it's going to go, that would be amazing. And I hope they're right. Like I remember, I think it was, I don't remember who it was now. I don't want to misattribute the quote, but one guy said, I am willing to change my eschatological view midair. And I'm completely willing for my grandchildren and great-grandchildren to find out that Papal was wrong and that the kingdom is going to spread like leaven and we are going to take over and rule this world. I would love for that to be true. Mm-hmm. And so if I was going to flip, I would have to be postmill because there are passages that seem to lean that way. Specifically the leaven passages, or I think there's one that's a commonly quoted one about something about what is it?
The age or the ages?
Well, I'm not. Yeah, I've never really been that compelled by that one. I think this one was something about a tree.
A tree
that spreads out and birds nest in its branches.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
like shelter in the tree. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So to me, that's a pretty commonly quoted one. And those arguments, you just listen to it and you're like, yeah, that sounds really good. And then like you get back into yourself and you're like, wait a second, no, like that's not right. And so it's almost like I don't want to compare it to a pyramid scheme, but like when you're sitting in the office with them and they're like, you're gonna make millions of dollars, and you're like, yeah, give me these oils, and then you walk out and you're like, wait a second, I have to, that wasn't good, like. That's how I feel with post-mill. I'm like, yeah, and then I walk outside and I'm like, no.
Well, I've got a remix on that, with Donald Trump. We're gonna win at everything we do. We're gonna win. You're gonna get tired of all the winning, in a nutshell. So
yeah, I mean, it would if you're post-mill, now looking at the world now, you're like, yeah, the Lord's not coming back anytime soon. It's definitely not a Christianized world. But yeah, Mark, you was gonna say something.
Post-mill will be very fun. It seemed just very fun, but because you win all the time, you're just gonna win. Yeah.
Doug Wilson, that was one of his arguments when they had that round table with Wilson and Hamilton and all those guys, Sam Storms and Piper. That was one of the reasons he said, he was like, I've got pretty much two arguments. Number one is Warfield believed it. Number two, it's lots of fun. And I was like, yeah, that's about right.
Yeah.
Like, really.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If I understand it right, John Piper came out with his book Providence years ago, which is the most exhaustive work on God's sovereignty, God's purpose behind sovereignty in Scripture. But if I remember right, he's going through eschatology now.
Yeah,
on his view on the premillennial reign of Christ.
Yep.
Is that true? Have you heard anything about that? Or
yeah, I think he's releasing it soon, I believe. Either he's releasing it
was
soon,
a book called Even So Come Lord Jesus.
Yep.
And that might be the most exhaustive, I'm thinking, or a big compilation of a lot of his work through his ministry. Is that right? Or do you know anything about it? Or
yeah, I don't know. I don't really know. The book that he's releasing now, from what I've seen, is not a Providence level book. It's not a very big book from what I've seen. But if he releases something like that, that'd be fantastic because he's historic premill. And so it would be a wonderful supplement to the literature we have. I hope that he does.
Yeah. So I do have a question. What is your strongest scriptural, just proof text? Obviously, like your strongest point for why everyone should become historic premill.
Well, I said this at the conference. If you read Revelation and you read it front to back, I don't see how you can come out of it without somebody telling you that it doesn't say what it says. If you just read this thing, I don't think you can come out of it not being historic premill. So like there's an example that some people have given, and I don't think it's perfect, but they said, look, if we burned all of the eschatological literature that we've accumulated over the last 2,000 years, if we burned all of it, and we refused to teach our children any eschatology, and we just left them the Bible, and then we died, the next generation would all be historic premill. And I don't think that's a perfect argument, but I definitely think that it's something. That Revelation 19 and 20, I just don't think can be argued with. And I gave my best defense of that at the conference. You just cannot read those two chapters as if they are not continual. They go right into each other. And so Anthony Hockema, who was an amillennialist, said that, like, if these two chapters flow directly into each other, you have to be premill.
Right.
And you can deal with Dispy or historic premill from other texts, but Revelation 19 and 20, you are forced into being premill. And that's of course my position as a premillennialist.
Yeah, sure.
If there was an amillennialist on the show right now, they'd probably be ringing their bell or something. But as far as a proof text, or if I want to show people to be historic premill, that's where I go. Gotcha.
So want to respect everyone's time. And my time as well. Y'all can continue to rock and roll, but I got to go at a certain time. Quickly dive into new creation.
Yeah. So new creation millennialism is scary but exciting. that was the number one question I was asked after the conference is, aren't you just new creation millennialist? You could make a compelling argument that John Gill was new creation millennialist, but I'm not. I definitely hope that I never will be at the moment. So new creation millennialism is a lot like historic premillennialism. They believe all of the stuff up to the millennium being the same. Right now, the new creation millennialist position is being spearheaded by two guys, a guy named Eckhard Schnabel and another guy named J.W. Mealy. Eckhard Schnabel, all respect to him, but he's not written very much. J.W. Mealy has written a lot.
Okay.
And I want to be careful with the words that I'm using, but I really don't think J.W. Mealy is the guy to be leading a new eschatological view. He borders on the edge of not even orthodox. So he's an annihilationist. He doesn't believe that hell is eternal conscious torment. You can be orthodox and not believe that. You can be an annihilationist and be orthodox. That's possible. But he also believes that when Christ raises the unjust with the second resurrection, Revelation 27-10, right? You've got this second resurrection. He believes that the purpose of that resurrection is so that the unjust can have another opportunity to get saved.
Oh,
okay. Which, to me, when you say that, you're departing from orthodoxy. The Bible seems to be very clear. When you're dead, right, it's over. And he believes, obviously, it doesn't go the way that it could. I mean, he's not saying that people will be saved, but he's saying that that's the reason God resurrects the unjust, is for the purpose of giving them another opportunity to be redeemed. That's not an option. Now, right now, I'm told that Thomas Schreiner is writing a commentary on the book of Revelation that would be from the new creation millennialist view. And obviously, he would not endorse either of those things.
Okay, so, I was going to say I know he's writing the commentary on Revelation now. So
and so if he does endorse that view, it will be a far cry from what Mealy has presented.
Okay,
and it may be something better. The thing that makes new creation millennialism distinct from historic premill is, from my understanding at least, and this would be where the name comes from, new creation millennialists believe that the millennial kingdom is on the new heavens and new earth. And so they believe that Revelation 21 is a recapitulation of Revelation 20, which you can make pro and con arguments. The main reason that I don't endorse it, and this is a very shallow reason, that's why I'm excited to see Dr. Schreiner's commentary, but in Revelation 21, when he has this vision, 21, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and the first earth had passed away. He specifically says in 21:1, and the sea was no more. Okay, so in the new heaven and the new earth, there is no ocean. And you can, if you take that as literally as I think that we ought to take it, it means literally there is no ocean. Okay, there's no sea. Well, back in chapter 20, it mentions the resurrection, and it says that they come out of the sea. That the people that are resurrected are coming out of the sea. And so if you try to say that Revelation 21 is a recapitulation of Revelation 20, I think you've got a hiccup where you have the ocean over here, but then over here there's clearly not one. If they can deal with that in a way that is consistent, then the view might be fine. That's what John Gill believed. John Gill believed that the millennial kingdom was on the new heaven and the new earth. And so that's not a new view.
Right.
And so if Thomas Schreiner comes out with something and it's what John Gill believed, then I would say, okay, well, then there is no such thing as new creation millennialism. There's just historic premill, and some of them believe in this and some of them don't. Right. But if I'm not even going to entertain the idea that Schreiner is going to jump on with Mealy on this nonsense. So I'm not a new creation millennialist at all, because the guys that are in that right now are just not the kind of people you want to have your name in the hat with.
And, if you could dumb that down for me a little bit, because part of that would be lifespans and everything, right? So what would be what's the difference then between what the kingdom would look like? If I understand, one is where you still have fallen people. Is that correct? And Christ reigning and ruling over them. The other one would be no, everyone's glorified. Could you talk about that a little bit? Or
Yeah, thank you. Good question, Mark.
Yeah, so both of those views are very welcome in historic premillennialism. So like I said at the conference, I believe that everyone that goes into the millennial kingdom is glorified. There's no death, there's no childbearing, there's no marriage. We are essentially what we will be in the eternal state. It's the fulfillment of what God promised to do through the whole Bible. It's just on the earth, and then we enter the eternal state. Other historic premillennialists believe that in the last day, through some sort of a miraculous work, God will redeem the Jews, which is the fulfillment of Romans 11, and that those Jews will not be glorified, and that they will go into the kingdom along with the glorified saints who have been raptured and glorified. And so the Jews, the non-glorified Jews, will then marry, have children. They will live in the kingdom together with glorified people. Their children will be born in a world that's still cursed, because it's still this planet, so they still bear the fruit of the curse, and some of them will not ultimately be redeemed. And so you have this lost group of people that make up the Gog and Magog army. Like I said, both of those views are very common in historic premillennialism. That view is probably more common than mine, I would have to say. Very welcome within the view, though, both either way.
And out of curiosity, what could you say about John Gill had this what would you call it? Belief in the conflagration, where the earth is burned up by fire. Could you talk about that a little bit, what that is and what his belief was there?
Yeah, so the conflagration of the earth refers to something, I believe it's out of 2 Peter, where Peter says that at the return of Christ, the world will be burned up and all the works that are therein. And so through that conflagration, there's a distinct view, and John Piper actually did a good job of queuing in on this when they had the round table there. Most everybody in the historic premill view believes that the world, by this fire that God brings on it, will be renovated, we might say, that he will purge it of all of the remnants of the curse, and that by that he will purify the earth for his son to come down and rule in the eternal state. And thus the new heavens and new earth are essentially just the renovated old heavens and old earth. Other people, particularly those in the Dispy camp, believe that conflagration, the burning of the earth, is literally an annihilation of it, and that God creates a new heaven and a new earth ex nihilo, kind of out of nothing, like he did the first one. Both views are very, very common. There's actually an interesting linguistic thing you can do with that Petron passage. The word that says will be, I believe he says burned up or destroyed, something along those lines, is the Greek word for loosed. It's the exact same word that's used in Revelation 20 to describe how Satan is loosed. And so you could very well take it that God is literally loosing the earth from the curse that is on it by this conflagration. And so that would go more in with the renovation view.
And when I hear about that, I always think of a parallel between the flood. You have any thoughts on that? Or
Yeah, I think that's a great parallel to draw. I think that's honestly part of the reason that God distinctly says, I will never again destroy the earth by water, is because he knew even back then, I will ultimately destroy the earth by fire. So I think that's a great parallel to draw. God once purged the earth by water, purified the earth by water. Now, obviously, it was different because Noah and his sons were still sinners and sin was still on the earth when the water receded. But the fire would be all-consuming. Everything that's in it will be burned up. And so you have a whole new thing.
And yet you would have those not in Noah's Ark who are saved, but those who are in the Lord Jesus Christ, they would be saved.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's a great parallel to draw. You should do a sermon on that.
Yeah. I mean, and hearing John Gill, sometimes when you listen to people in church history, people that we love and adore, they were really off on some things. And I'm sure that, years from now, hey, Mark was really off on something, some things. John Gill, because G3 went through some of his eschatology.
Yeah.
And kind of had that consensus. Seems like maybe he was off here, but then other times where he's talking about the conflagration and his belief there, I'm like, oh, whoa, that is, it just gets my mind going,
Yeah, Gil had a lot of wacky stuff. Like he believed that the Ottoman Empire was the embodiment of the Antichrist, and obviously that doesn't even exist anymore. So like, there's clearly some stuff that was dated, but we can't lay that on his feet. It's like he was the first Reformed Baptist to ever write a systematic theology. So like he, give the man his props.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So Martin asked a question: Can you use the end of Matthew 23, 37 through 39 to go with Zechariah chapter 14?
I think I know where he's going with Zechariah 14.
Let's see here. 37 to 39. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate, for I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And then Zechariah 14. Do you know what the correlation is?
Well, it's a lengthy passage, but it does talk about the coming day of the Lord, and I thought it was going in a different direction. Zechariah 12 discusses this moment where the house of David, the Jews, they see this this figure, and they mourn for him like they mourn for an only child. They weep over him like they weep over a firstborn, and it specifically says they look on him whom they have pierced, and so we know that's referring to Christ. Whether Jesus was referencing that or alluding to that in chapter 23 of Matthew, I wouldn't take a hard and fast view either way on that. It's definitely likely that he was alluding to something, and it could have been that. But I wouldn't take a hard and fast view on that. Yeah, chapter 12. So yeah, he's got it there. Chapter 12. So and I wish we had more time to get into that. I know you got to get out of here soon, Daryl, but I
can drop. You guys can continue to go on for real. I'm going to drop at this point, but just keep going.
Okay. Keep going. All right. Thanks for having me out, brother.
Yeah, you take care, man.
Yeah. So Zechariah 12 does talk about that. They'll look on him whom they have pierced, and I have a different view than a lot of people on that. So my view is that at the return of Christ, of course, the church is raptured up, glorified in that moment. I actually think that is the moment that Zechariah 12 takes place, that the Jews that are alive on the earth will see Christ returning. They'll look on him whom they have pierced and weep for him like they would for their only child, like a firstborn. And in that moment, God will work some sort of a miraculous regenerative work in them and save them. Of course, I also believe he'll glorify them before they go into the millennial kingdom. But we've talked already on the show that there are a lot of historic premillennialists that believe that in the last day, God will work some sort of a miraculous work among the people of Israel to save them in fulfillment of Romans 11, whether that's a revival over the period of some time or some sort of a single event like what I'm describing. Most everybody agrees that that'll go on.
And the post millennials, they'd be like, well, that's true about Israel. Generally, they would say, and everyone else. There'll be a revival everywhere. And hey, that's really, compelling to me that there's both revivals going on worldwide.
Yeah, and that was one of the things I asked Tim in the Q&A session, because he was the post-mill rep. I said, so you actually believe that there will be more people saved than lost? And he said, yeah. And I have to admit, like, as a premillennialist, that's a foreign idea, because even if you're optimistic all-mill, optimistic pre-mill, there's no way you believe that more people will be saved than lost.
Well, in our mind, my mind would go to Matthew 7, and the broad way, the narrow way. And when I see some post-mill folks, they'll say, no, Matthew 7 is not teaching that more people will go to hell, to destruction, than to, find eternal life. I don't see that though.
Yeah, I agree. That was the passage that I quoted to him, and he said exactly that was a reference to Jesus's day specifically, that many people would fall away from Christ, but few would follow him. And I'm with you. I can't see that.
Mhm. Oh, let's see. Beyond that, let me think. What else?
Yeah, Daryl had sent me a couple of things that we were supposed to go over during this. I'm going to make sure we've covered everything.
I think we did. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Strong.
we've covered all the stuff that he had on prompts.
Mhm,
I love the intro with Lawson.
mhm.
Do you change that every time?
I've got those are 2 minutes, and I have maybe 10 or so. I've got 6 right now.
Cool.
Yeah, but I've been on YouTube for a while, and I've got maybe 50 or 60 sermon jams with Steve Lawson, and started with doing kind of random ones. Actually, the first one was the narrow way sermon that he preached there. Then I went through the 5 solas, the attributes of God. When Steve Lawson preaches, he preaches the attributes of God, which is kind of lost in a lot of churches nowadays, preaching through the attributes. And God is who he is in the fullness, that thereof. And so when we preach, we should preach his wrath, his kindness, his aseity, that God isn't dependent on any of his creatures and all that. And then went through the doctrines of grace. So it's been fun doing that too. So
Well, a great deal of my early Christian walk was forged by sermon jams, which is a weird thing to say. It's a very millennial generation thing and that's true for a lot of people, probably in our generation, that a lot of our theology came from YouTube,
mhm.
because we grew up on these guys. But I remember specifically, and this is telling. I came to faith under the ministry of Rabbi Zacharias.
Mhm.
And so there are a lot of sermon jams of him still up. A lot of them got deleted when the whole fiasco went down with him. And then I as a teenager, I listened a lot to Mark Driscoll. And then that all went the way that it went.
Yeah.
And so there's something to this, that like we were forged online through sermon jams and YouTube videos and stuff. And the guys that I grew up under, at least, have all had these disastrous ends.
Mhm.
And there's something there that really needs to be done for the young generation, where our heroes are all hundreds of miles away and we're watching them online. Like, I appreciate, I'm not trying to slam you for doing sermon jams,
Mhm.
especially on Lawson, because Lawson's top notch. But
Yeah.
I also I love the fact that we're getting to the point now where the Reformed community is starting to say, no, we need to be in local churches, because this idea that you can have a healthy religious life without being plugged into a local church was something that I was convinced of for the longest time. And then I saw the fallout of these guys, and it just has completely leveled me that no, you need a local church with people that you can look to and that are held accountable, that can help you forge yourself in a spiritual way.
Yeah, I was at church a while ago, and pastor read the statistics on church attendance after COVID, after the sickness hit and everything. And what was it at? I think 60% or so of what it was pre-COVID is
Wow.
what church attendance is now. And so it Montana might be different because we're more rural and everything. Um, but a lot of places people have not been getting back to church, and then hey, I'll go to church on my phone or online or
Right.
something, but that's not, people need that fellowship. So
Yeah. And like, just to the point of the statistics, my church, we're 1689, but we're also SBC, and we're holding strong. Like, we are holding in there.
uh-huh.
We're going to turn this ship. And so, but I read a statistic earlier this month, or last month now, that said that it was like 54% of people in SBC churches are over the age of 50.
Mm,
And that's the case for every single main Protestant denomination, that
mhm,
over half of their attendees are over the age of 50. And so they were saying, like, in this next generation, you give it 20, 30 years, you're going to see these churches just die because young people are just not going.
mhm.
And so the response that everybody has is, well, we need to adapt and learn how to reach these people. And I don't know that that's really the answer. I think that a lot of the young people have just never actually been taught the gospel. They were taught, say a prayer, shake my hand, get dunked, and you're good. And I've got a family member that they have this relationship with God where if their life is going very well, they think that they can be faithful to God and go to church. But when things go wrong, suddenly they distance themselves from God because they think, well, and this may be not subliminal, something. There's a word there.
Subconscious, yeah.
Subconscious, yeah.
There you go.
It may be subconscious, but the thought may be, well, God doesn't work for me. If when I'm faithful to God, my life doesn't get better, it gets worse. So maybe God's real, but I don't need to go out of my way to be faithful to him, because when I do, life goes bad. And I think there's probably a lot of people that fall into that. They feel like, if I'm committed to church and trying to do my very best to be faithful to God, suddenly my life gets a lot worse. And so I'll just leave that alone.
Yeah, and the church has changed quite a bit. I was thinking when I was a kid in the church, deeply fundamentalist church, or pretty fundamentalist, and we'd have long church services at times. At times, we'd have church services that went on for 5 or 6 hours. And I'd be a kid, and I'd be there pulling my hair out or counting ceiling tiles or different things. And yet I can remember times we're just having encounters with God, because you're there, you're at church, and you're going to church, not once a week, not twice a week. You're going there many Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday, youth group on Mondays, that kind of thing. And with what we have going on just in culturally, we were talking about a couple episodes ago in public education, you had them replace God as the creator. Well, then once that domino goes down, then you don't have God as sustainer, lawgiver, and judge. And now, the statistics for LGBT folks, it's I think 1 in 5 or so youth now identify as LGBT, and it's just growing. And so times are changing in this country for sure.
Yeah, there's a person in our local community that's a guidance counselor for a school, and I talked to them about that at one point, and they said that they have 60 kids that they see through the school system on a recurring basis. They said 2 of them are not in the LGBTQ plus community. And so I know, correlation doesn't mean causation, but it's a heck of a correlation that 58 out of 60 kids that need to see the guidance counselor on a recurring basis just so happen to also think that they're part of this community. Maybe they're being told that there's something that they're not to cover up a problem that's actually underlying in the fog. And we know that it's just getting, lower and lower the age at which they're telling these kids. I just saw an article published by the Daily Wire that said there were some parents that were coming out of that movement and they had transitioned their 4-year-old.
Oh, wow.
And they were saying, we really regret transitioning our 4-year-old. I'm like, yeah. Like it's insane. And you don't blame, at least in our area, we can't blame the educators, because for the most part, the teachers don't get to choose their curriculum and they don't get to decide what the policy of the school is. But there's something going on in our educational system that is causing this to happen. There's a great book. If I had it in arm's reach, I'd pull it out. It's called Irreversible Damage by Abigail Schreier.
Okay, yeah. I've heard of that one.
I would recommend anybody to read it, because she goes through what's going on, and particularly with young girls. Because I think it's like prior to 2000, there was not one case ever of a young female under 18 ever believing that they were trans. That had never happened. It was all males whenever it did happen, very rarely. And now I think it's the vast majority of trans people are biologically female.
Yeah. I've heard that too. Yeah. It's overwhelming now. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can understand why. I had a roommate when I was community college. She
Mhm.
was a girl. I knew she was a girl. I just thought she was a tomboy, and she needed a place to stay, and I had a spare room in my apartment, and I wasn't really a committed Christian at this point. And so I thought, well, save me half the rent. And so I let her rent the other room in my apartment. And I did not know this was, we were in the Me Too movement at that time. We were not yet really into the trans thing. We were working through women's rights at that point. And there was this time that I went into the bathroom and there was just urine all over the place. And I was like, what in the world is going on in here? And then after like a week of that happening, I found like a weird shaped funnel in the bathroom. And so I asked her, I was like, what the heck is going on in the bathroom? And she was like, oh, I'm trying to train myself on how to pee standing up. And like, she was a sweet person. She was like a really good person, but she was slowly trying to transition into being more male without having bottom surgery. And the stuff I remember thinking like, what in the world are you doing? And now that we've got, just children going through that and parents endorsing it, it's a travesty. And it getting into eschatology, you look at this performance here recently where the guy is like, I'm the devil, and CBS is like, we're here to worship.
Was that the Grammys or?
I don't know.
Who watches it nowadays?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Who watches
no
it?
one. Yeah.
But, you see stuff like that, and then you look at our public schools, and it's like all the kids have like, I'm a boy when they're a girl, or vice versa, and you're like, post-mill just doesn't look like it's gonna cut it, like this. Yeah. This doesn't look like it's getting better.
Mm-hmm.
But you just pray.
Mm-hmm. Because, well, and that's one of the things objections that David Martin Lloyd Jones brought up. If you would have told Charles Hodge and other post-millennials, hey, there's a time coming where if you live in Europe, you could be thrown in jail for preaching the gospel. What nation was it? If you speak out against, I guess, trans rights, you can be thrown in jail over there. I don't know if it's Finland or Norway or which one exactly it was. But it's, we could think of a time in the United States where if you preach repentance and faith, from that lifestyle, where first off, you probably you get sued, and there'd be financial consequences first, but then maybe even more stiffer consequences down the road. Well, that doesn't seem to fit with the post-mill framework, but they would just say, hey, give it another 1,000 years or 10,000 years. And that backwards now and then, give it some time for it to run its destruction, because secular humanism will, you sow those oats and it'll sow destruction. And then, people will call out, kind of the cycle that we see in the Old Testament where people sin and then there's bondage and then they cry out and there's repentance and God delivers them. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, I hope they're right. I would love to see it turn around. And like I said, I have to say in my grandkids or my great grandkids' day, because you can't turn a ship this fast. Like when Al Mohler took Southern Seminary in the 90s, it was very, very liberal compared to where it's at now. And a lot of people don't like where it's at now, but it was very, very liberal. And one of the interviews that he did back then was he said, things do not become more conservative gradually. You have to change it radically. Somebody has to come in and change everything and just do it. You cannot do it gradually. Things become more liberal gradually, not more conservative. And I think that's right.
Yeah.
And unless we have some sort of a person or some sort of a massive reset, like you're explaining, I mean, we literally have to lose everything. And then the people just say, no, we had it right a long time ago. We need to go back. Mm-hmm. It's very unlikely to me that you can turn this ship at this point.
Yeah. To steer the conversation back to the Olivet discourse real quick, Steve Lawson, when he's preaching, I listened to his videos on his eschatology a while ago, and he's dispensational, but part of his view would be the Lord Jesus Christ returns in the Olivet discourse. And You have this pitch black midnight darkness, can't see your hand in front of your face, that just terrorizes everyone. And then, so you have a span of time like that. And then Jesus Christ returns, and it's his bright, radiant light, brighter than 10,000 suns. So you have kind of two terrifying things going on: the pitch black darkness, if you're an unbeliever, and then this bright, shining light coming down from the heavens. Do you have any thoughts on that by chance?
Well, I mean, that's a great way of expositing that. And if you're Dispy and you see the entire Olivet discourse as being future, or at least the majority of it, then I think that that's a great way. And if it's a double fulfillment prophecy, like I talked about earlier, I think that that's completely feasible. I personally, one of the things that I love to do, we are in chapter 18 of Revelation right now at my church. I'm preaching through Revelation one chapter at a time, because that keeps me from getting bogged down. I can't do verse by verse. It'd take me years.
Yeah.
And so I have to do it a chapter at a time. But one of the things, there's a plague like that in the book of Revelation, where the world is covered by darkness. These locusts are called out of the earth, and they cover the earth with darkness. And in studying through that, even in historic pre-mill commentaries, a lot of those guys commented on that, saying that the darkness that they were experiencing was not a literal darkness like what they experienced in the Exodus, but a spiritual darkness, or a mental darkness, or an emotional darkness. And so the darkness that just overtook everyone was literally everything light, everything encouraging, everything that would cause you to be inspired is taken away. And in that last day, there will come a time when it'll just be absolute depression and anxiety and hatred and loathe, and the entire world will just be shrouded in that darkness. But when Christ returns, getting back to Lawson's point there's this radiant light that just blows the darkness away. And so you could take that same analogy, and if you took it to read that way, then you could say, like what Christ is explaining in these last days, whether you take it literally, this darkness that comes on the people, where they're just completely depressed and anxious and hateful. And when Christ comes, he just eliminates all of that. And you're filled with grace and mercy and peace and joy and love. And there's even an element in there, I forget what chapter it is specifically, but at the end of the chapter, it says they did not repent, but they continued in their sorcery. I think the ESV renders it. And the Greek word is pharmakia, which of course is where we get the word pharmacy. And so the way that I preached it was that in that last day, there will come a time when everybody is depressed, everybody's filled with anxiety, nobody can focus, everybody is wondering about their future, and so they run to the pharmacy to get the thing that they think can fix them, when the only thing that could fix them was Christ. And so that kind of blends those two topics we were just talking about together, where you have this definite darkness that's come on the world, where we all have a problem anymore. Everybody's diagnosable with something, but what do you do? And so the Christians, they run to Christ and they receive light from him. Go to Christ, Christ will give you light. The world runs to the pharmacy and they say, I need a drug, or I need a doctor to give me something, or to cut some part of me off, or to put some part of me on. And I think that you could preach that the way that Lawson is preaching it, more symbolically. And to me, it's more terrifying that in the last day, the world would come under a spiritual, emotional, mental darkness than some sort of a literal darkness where you can't see your hand in front of your face. That would be scary. But to deal with the fact that for a long time, everybody is depressed and anxious and hateful. And that when the book of Revelation says there will come a time when they want to die, but they can't. They run to death, but it eludes them. You talk to somebody in the hospital going through chemo, and if they've been going through it a long time, they're in their 4th, 5th treatment, that person will probably communicate to you that at this point, they would be just as happy to die as they would to come out of this. They say, I would just as well God just take me. And you talk to a lot of older people that are in a bad physical state, and they'll say that. I wish God would just take me. They're not going to kill themselves, but they wish that death would come, but it seems to be eluding them.
Mhm.
And I
Well,
took it that way. Yeah, go ahead.
and with what you were saying about people transitioning and everything, there's stories of so many people who transitioned and then it ruins a person's body, it ruins their mental health over time. And then there's such regret there. I think that they could have a similar kind of feeling, especially after going through hormonal treatment, making changes, cutting, that kind of stuff. There could be that same kind of dread or just regret, really, going on there as well.
Yeah, and one of the most important things for the Christian community to remember is two things. Number one, churches need to be ready because in the next 20 years, there's going to be a flood of people coming into our churches who are permanently damaged from this stuff. People that have transitioned, people that have gone through hormonal replacement therapy, and they are going through this stuff now. In 20 years, they're going to be flooding the church. And if we're not ready and equipped for that influx of people that don't look like us and don't have standard bodies and can't have children, we are not going to be equipped when they come in to tell them what they can do with their lives that is worth doing for Christ.
Mhm.
But the other truth that we also have to be mindful of is that even now, when these people are living in these sinful ways, they're not the enemy. The LGBTQ community is not our enemy. The woke community is not our enemy. They're POWs. To go into their places and think that they're the ones that are deceiving people is to shoot prisoners of war.
Mhm.
They are deceived by Satan. They're deceived in this. And so we don't need to go in and say, you're a terrible person that's leading the world astray and you need to repent because you are the problem. That we need to be preaching that they need to repent of their sins because there's grace to be found when they repent. But they're the ones that are not, they're not the ones that are causing the problem. They are actually deceived. They've been taught a lie and didn't have any sort of real opportunity to understand that it was a lie. When you're taught this 2, 3, 4 years old, you
Yeah.
don't understand that this is a lie. And you don't understand that this is even an option. You don't know that there's any other way. And so I think that those are two things that the church right now is doing badly. That
Mhm.
we are not equipped to help the people that are coming out of those communities. And we don't understand that they're not the enemy. They're prisoners of war of the enemy. They've been captured. They've been mentally taken captive. And so we really need to treat them differently.
Mhm.
But I'm probably going to get a bunch of people saying that I'm woke for even suggesting that. That's how I feel, though.
No, yeah, I get that in that, a lot of times people just take those sides, and we're just, hey, they're on that other side. There's the tribalism component. And so that goes on. And yet, our grandparents, even our parents, they never dealt with some of the things that we're dealing with now, the way that we're dealing with them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
No, I mean, well, Ricky Gervais, he's a terribly vulgar comedian, but he's funny.
Mhm.
And he has a bit about how that you're not going to find any 12-year-old tweets of people saying that women don't have male genitalia. And he said, do you know why you won't find any of those tweets? Because 12 years ago, we didn't think we had to say that. And so it's entirely something that our parents and grandparents, they've never conceived that such a thing was even possible. And, you hate to say it, but in 2012, when gay marriage was legalized, everybody was saying, well, it's just gay marriage. This isn't going to have, it's just that. We're not asking for more. We're asking just for equality. It's like,
Mhm.
well, here
that
we
was,
are.
Yeah, that was 2016, though, I think.
Oh, was it?
20, I'm pretty sure it's 2016, 2000. Yeah. And because it's only been like 6 years or so. It hasn't even been 10 or 11 years.
Really?
America's gone a long ways in just 6 years.
Yeah, really quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's unbelievable. Like I said, I look back at just college years. That was like 5 or 6 years ago that I had that roommate, and I had no idea that girls were becoming boys. Like, I didn't even know that was a thing. I thought she was a tomboy. And so It's so fast this has happened, and the way that we've reacted to it as a culture is unbelievable, specifically with like the major forces like the medical community. For doctor, like there was the Vanderbilt expose that came out here in the last couple of months, when there was a doctor at Vanderbilt that was recorded saying that if somebody suggested that they were considering transitioning, that they should be pushed towards it, because transition surgeries are very lucrative financially for doctors. I mean, and I'm not saying that all doctors are just money groveling, terrible trolls, but the way that the communities, like the public educational system and the medical community, have jumped in with this and just said, no, this is a good thing that everybody needs to be taught, with the genderbread man and all this stuff. What in the world happened? And I think it gets back to what we talked about earlier, where we went through a generation where people were told biblical commitment is not really an issue. You don't need to understand the Bible or read it or teach it or faithfully attend church. Just pray a prayer and you'll be good. My wife is an author, and she's in the publishing community, and she has a friend that just, I want to say came out as a Christian to the publishing community. And she makes covers for authors for their books. And she's been working in this for a couple of years. And she had done a couple of books that were either like gay romance or polygamous romance. And she came out and said, I'm not going to do those anymore because it's, making me violate my religious conviction. And she has lost, in the course of 2 weeks, thousands of dollars from people that wanted refunds, or had to just delete her social media accounts because people were harassing her for even saying that, when she's had the word Christian in her bio everywhere for years. And that just tells you that the word Christian just means nothing anymore, because there are so many people that would proclaim themselves Christians. I'm pretty sure Pete Buttigieg says that he's a Christian. And he's, a gay man that's in favor of like full-term abortion. And it's like, well, if that guy's a Christian, like, it means nothing.
Well, and there was a conversation, I think, between R.C. Sproul and John MacArthur years and years ago. Hey, is there a new name that we need beside Christian or evangelical? And they chose the name, I think, is R.C. Sproul, imputationist. Hey, maybe, or they threw out that name as, possibility, which, sounds good, because double imputation, and that being so close to the heart of the gospel. Yeah. Being in Montana, I feel like we're still sheltered. I mean, from a lot of stuff over here. Our biggest city is about 100,000. And so a lot of the stuff you get in your mega cities with multi-million, folks, it seems like to me.
Yeah, I saw a lady pop up with a comment there asking about the genderbread man. If you've not heard of that, look it up. It's in most states, the State Department of Education has actually endorsed what's called the genderbread man to be taught to young children ages 5 and up. And it's essentially just, I'm going to call it propaganda. I mean, it is indoctrination to the full, where they're teaching little children that they can choose whatever gender they want to be, and that it is entirely independent of their biology or their anatomy. It's completely unrelated, that they decide what gender they want to be. And that's something that's deeply embedded in the public education system right now. Yeah, I liked Montana when I was there. I preached in Missoula and Frenchtown and a little town called 9 Mile, and beautiful land out there. We got to hike the M at the university. I don't know if you've ever been around that area, but
yeah, well, Missoula, that area is amazing over there. Yeah,
I loved it
and everything. Yeah. Oh, let's see. So with that, do you have any closing thoughts or anything about historic pre-mill, or just, what things going on in the world? We could talk. We could probably talk forever, but yeah.
Yeah, right. I'm glad to talk with you, man. As far as historic pre-mill goes, it's I really think that the next generation is going to see a great revival in historic premillennialist teachers and preachers. Mostly because people don't understand that a lot of these guys are, like Al Mohler's historic premill. Most people didn't know that. And when you're looking at guys like John Piper, you don't know he's historic premill. He is, and there's so many that are like that are out here. I really like Brian Chappell, who's Presby, and he's historic premill. So there's so many guys out here that are historic premill, but what we lack, like that guy told me at the conference, is we're lacking somebody to stand up and start writing on this view, the way that you have books like oh gracious, they went through a couple at Eschatology Matters, and they had the author on, but there are amillennialist books and postmillennialist books, and they're just written on those positions. Now Craig Blomberg and Sungwook Chung over at Denver Seminary, they wrote a book called A Case for Historic Premillennialism a couple of years ago. I think might have been as far back as 2012. And the book was fine, but it wasn't a comprehensive book. It was a collection of essays. And the essays were written on certain topics. For example, one guy wrote an essay on, I believe it was historic premillennialism being compatible with Calvinism. And you're thinking, that is not an argument that anybody is having right now. Like, it's not...
Yeah, because I've heard that the inability of mankind to set up this, kind of golden age, or this reign, only Jesus Christ can do it. And was it John Gill, some would say, Jesus Christ returns, and there still is this massive rebellion, and it still points to the inability of man.
Yeah, the view that holds that the lost people in the millennium make up the Gog and Magog army, they certainly have an argument there that is in line with total depravity. That's definitely true. Now, my view also, the fact that the Gog and Magog army resurrect, or the resurrected unjust, and that they also rebel against God, I think that also is compatible with total depravity, because even seeing the kingdom of God realized and fully physical, they still do not embrace Christ and are still his enemies. And so unless we are glorified and rid of the curse, I think that the total depravity is entirely right, of course, but I don't think that necessarily means that postmillennialism is wrong. That'd be a weak argument for that, but I can see that. Like I said, I would really love for postmillennialism to be true. But, I don't know. All of my degrees are in history, and I've just read too much history. And another argument that I just can't lay down with postmillennialism is people say, well, look, when Jesus died, he had 12 disciples, but now Christianity is the biggest religion in the world. No, it's not. It's not. Christianity, if you look at the statistics, has over 2 billion practitioners, but that includes like 1.3 billion Catholics.
That'd be inflated. That'd be, government counting or something. Or yeah,
right. And so even if you look at just this, if you take the government at their word, still over half of the people that say that they're Christians are Catholics, and most Reformed people don't believe that Catholics are genuinely Christians. They believe that they're heterodox. And so we would say, well, no, those are not Christians. And so you're left with 700 million, maybe, Protestants that we would say, okay, those are Christians. And then you make the point that you've made, is like, you really think that all the people that say that they're Protestants are genuinely Christians? Like, you go through all the PC USA. You really think that everybody in the PC USA is genuinely a Christian? You really think that everybody that's a part of these really crazy liberal Christian denominations are genuinely Christians? You really believe that? And so we could whittle this down pretty easily to probably 200 million pretty quick.
Yeah.
And at that point, we're getting down close to some of the lowest numbers in the world. I mean, we're past Hinduism and Buddhism and Confucianism probably in the talk. We're getting close to Judaism. I mean, Christianity, if we're looking at genuine Christian converts, probably one of the smallest religions in the world. And so that argument again just doesn't compel me.
It's not very convincing. Yeah. And I mean, I would just like to have them convince me, it will not take the personal return of Jesus Christ to usher in the millennial reign. Like, we don't need his personal return. I'm just unconvinced of that. And, I'm open when I hear Gary DeMar talk about the Olivet discourse and how a lot of it was fulfilled, or he would argue all of it of Matthew 24 was fulfilled, in 70 AD. Hey, they make some really compelling points there.
Yeah. When I heard R.C. Sproul, he has a series on YouTube called The Last Days According to Jesus. And he laid out preterism, essentially. And I was like you with Gary DeMar. I was like, oh no. Because I was like, that sounds right. Mm-hmm. And he drew a lot from Josephus. And he even actually talked about this theory that the return of Christ, as described in the Olivet Discourse, did occur in 70 AD, because there were some ancient authors that talked about seeing chariots in the clouds during the destruction. And when he talked about that, that's when I was like, oh, no. No, that's not right.
Because, I'm trying to think, because I don't want to, what's the word I'm looking for? Misrepresent them at all. And yet, talk about judgment and Jesus Christ's return in judgment in Matthew 24, is what some would say.
Yeah. And that he, levied out that judgment on Jerusalem. And that's what he's talking about at the end of 23. I think one of the fellows brought that up. I would have gathered you in, but now your house is left desolate. And what I recently just from 2021 to 2022, we preached through the Gospel of John. And if you read the Gospels and you don't understand that the door to the Jews is being closed, you're not reading it. Like, he continually says, this is the end for them. They are so losing their relationship with God right now because of the way that they're acting in relation to Christ. And he just alludes to that over and over and over again. My wife actually just asked me about Romans 11 today, because she's she's actually reading through the New Testament sequentially, and so she read Acts and now she's in Romans. And she was like, I read Romans 11 today, and he was talking about breaking branches off, and she said it sounded like what the dispensationalists believe, because he says that he broke off the Jews, and it would be very easy for him to break off the unnatural branch and graft back on the natural branch. And she was like, that sounds like the parentheses. And I was like, yeah. I mean, he threatened to do that. He said that it was possible, but that's not something that he said he's going to do. Now, for you, as a, would you say you're historic premill, but you've been amill?
No, dispensate. Well, I grew up in the Assembly of God, highly dispensational.
Okay.
Never been amill, never been post mill, but yeah.
Okay.
And when you're in Bible college, hey professor, what's amill? I'd say, well, amill, that's where you stop believing in hell. You stop believing anything. Israel doesn't exist. Heaven does, hell doesn't exist, that kind of thing. It's the road to liberalism. And that's the way that it is for a lot of dispensationalists when they talk about millennialism, just, historically within Pentecostalism and all that, and with what they would call, replacement theology and all that.
Yeah.
And within the Assembly of God, it is a kind of a non-negotiable, like, you must believe in the rapture, and, dispensational premillennialism. With an asterisk, they'll make exceptions, but you can't preach against what the denomination holds there on specific things. And that's the thing that I wish would kind of go away from denominations. But sometimes, hey, I believe in annihilationism. Okay, they're probably all millennial, and it'll turn out to be true. But and you were talking about that earlier. I mean, John Stott was, towards the end of his life, he came out believing in annihilationism, and he was a major evangelist, like Billy Graham.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't question his salvation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, there's actually, I'll show this book just for anybody that's curious. So, The Church and the Tribulation by Robert Gundry. I don't know if you've ever heard of that guy. He's not a very, very famous guy.
is he a creation? I'm thinking
I
Gentry.
really don't.
I'm thinking Gentry. Never mind.
Yeah, Robert Gentry is much
Yeah.
more famous. Yeah. Gundry, that book, it was big in its day. It's not very common now, but he was a post-trib dispy. And so it's crazy the way that he argues, because there's so much of that book, because we believe in the rapture and the second coming being the same event. And so we're post-trib by definition.
Mm-hmm.
He's post-trib, but he's post-trib dispy. And so he'll be arguing against dispensationalist points that are pre-trib. And I'm like, yeah, you've got it. And then he'll start talking about some wacky stuff that I would like, no, like, stop. And so the book is interesting to read because it's so unique. He is fully dispensationalist and does not believe in a pre-trib rapture, doesn't even believe in mid-trib. And there's some mid-trib dispies that believe that the rapture happens at the abomination of desolation 3.5 years in.
Mm-hmm.
So that we're there for the good part of the tribulation when the Antichrist is making everybody love him, but we get whisked out when the bad stuff happens. And, that's part of that view. But that book is definitely one to read if you're dispy and you're looking at it and you're saying, well, I don't really see a pre-trib rapture, but the rest of dispensationalism makes sense to me. That would be a book to read.
Okay, yeah. And you never got into really the history of dispensationalism with the secret rapture and the history, because that's one of the compelling arguments that led me out of it. Because before, years ago, not that long ago, I would have said, hey, I'm dispensational, but I'd be more pre-wrath. I believe that God's wrath is never against his children, and that'd be a big deal for my belief. There still a big deal. God's wrath is never against his children, but my understanding just of the secret rapture is that's not biblical. So
yeah, and to be fair, there are some people that straw man the argument against dispensationalism and say, this view was never talked about before John Nelson Darby. It was dreamt up by some teenage girl that he got it from, and then he made it famous. That may not be true. There's an argument to be made that there were people that believed in a secret rapture way before Darby. That's something that we don't want to say never happened. There were definitely people historically down through the church that believed that there was some sort of a removal of the church that was a secret event. It wasn't common. It would be like saying today there are people that believe you can't wear your shoes while you preach because you're on holy ground. It's like, well, yeah, I'm sure there are some, but it's not very common.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's been something that's happened, but Darby and then Schofield, of course, really popularized that.
That's interesting. If there, could you name a dispensationalist theologian, before the 1800s or so? No.
Dispensationalism as a framework.
But more just the secret rapture, I guess, if we just limit it to that. Would there be someone more influential or
let me
history on that? Or
let me look real quick, because I have a buddy who he's dispy, and if I start cutting out, it's because I'm using the internet on my phone. But
yeah.
Let me look real quick, because he's dispy and he is doing everything that he can to defend dispensationalism historically. So, okay, here's a big one. He actually says that Increase Mather attempted to prove that the saints would be caught up into the air, escaping the final conflagration beforehand. I would say, well, yeah, of course. I agree. That's not dispy. He has another guy from the 1600s, Peter Jury, Jurieu, who wrote a book, Approaching Deliverance of the Church, that taught that Christ would come in the air to rapture the saints and return to heaven before the Battle of Armageddon. He says Morgan Edwards, this is 1740, believed that there was a rapture 3.5 years before the beginning of the millennium. I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, he talks about all kinds of stuff that is definitely out of my wheelhouse. It's stuff that I just have no interest in studying. But when I did my D-Min, I wrote a pretty substantial paper on the lack of a historical precedent for a pre-trib rapture. Because when you get into dispensationalism, it's very important that they tie this Daniel's 70th week to eschatology. That's crucial for dispensationalism.
Mm-hmm.
And that idea, particularly that the last tribulation is 7 years long and that the rapture occurs before it, that's entirely new. That's something that was never heard of before Darby, and that's a huge point against dispensationalism, that this is entirely something that's new.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of the church escaping God's wrath, like you explained, there's nothing new about that. I mean, I preach that when I, as a futurist, I'm largely futurist. I lean futurist idealist, if those words mean anything to people. But as a futurist, I believe that the church will largely be withheld from God's wrath. When I read Revelation 12 with the woman that's taken away into the wilderness, of course, I believe that the woman represents the church, and so she's taken into the wilderness to be hidden for a time, times, and half a time, while the rest of the world is going through this hardship. I'm completely comfortable with the idea that the church will be protected from God's wrath by his providence, while at the same time existing in a world that is under God's wrath.
Yeah.
So
Kind
yeah,
of, well,
go ahead.
and there'd be a parallel even with the plagues in Egypt.
Exactly.
Those plagues. Yeah.
Yeah.
And another thing that I'd hear from dispensationalists would be in Revelation, I think chapter 4 is the last mention of the church. And so that's
3.
Is it Revelation 3?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's the letters to the 7 churches.
Okay. Yep. Any thoughts on that? Because that's one of the arguments that I hear several times, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is, to be fair, it's the last time that he uses the word church, the ecclesia, until you get past the vast majority of what we would consider tribulational descriptions. He uses all manner of other words that always describe the church. So you'll find the word saints over and over and over again. You'll find the word brethren. You'll find descriptions that seem to clearly describe the church. So like I talked, the woman that's taken away into the wilderness, from whom the one who raises himself into heaven comes. Of course, we talk about that being Christ, and the woman I say is the church, but that's because I believe that Israel is the church. And so if you believe in a distinction between Israel and the church, then you would say it's Israel, and then Israel is taken away into the wilderness and God protects them. So it's all tied together, and it's good, because at least then dispensationalism is consistent. You have to be consistent in your own view. But I don't think that argument is any good, because there's so many ways in the New Testament that, I mean, the word brother by itself, Delphoi, just to use the Greek word Delphoi, that often in the New Testament represents the church. So if you're going to say there's no word that ever represents church other than ecclesia, that's nonsense. So that argument obviously isn't compelling to me. But John MacArthur talked about that when he did his jet tour through Revelation. I've listened to that a couple of times. And he talks about that, how that in the end of chapter 3, that's the last time you see the church until you get to glory. And it's an argument,
It's an argument. Yeah. I mean, because I always think more, hey, the just shall live by faith. Abraham believed God, God counted him righteous. And so you have Abraham, the believer, and then you have New Testament believers, and just a unity there. Hey, what makes someone a child of God? They're a believer. They believe, looking forward to Christ or looking back at the cross, and they're justified by faith.
Right. Yeah, and that's exactly the way that I've tried to describe it to my church, because my church, when I came to be their pastor 4 years ago, most everybody here was dispensationalist. But they weren't like headstrong dispensationalist, as in they were not willing to change any of their beliefs. They'd only ever heard dispensationalism from the pulpit. You know, they hadn't like gone through a Schofield study Bible and made sure that they believed thoroughly dispensationalism. That's just all they'd ever heard. And so when I came in and started talking about how that people in the Old Testament were saved by faith and not by their sacrifices, that was a new idea. And when I start saying, well, they looked to Christ forward the same way that we look to Christ backwards, and they believed in faith, and Abraham was saved by faith. And you even read, I'm preaching at a conference in Tennessee on the 16th, 17th, 18th called Shadows to Substance, where James White is actually going to be preaching at the same conference. And one of I've been tasked with the responsibility of preaching Christ our Passover. And so I'm going through Exodus 12. And one of the things in preparation for that sermon was I was going through Hebrews 11, where it says that Moses offered the Passover, but it says by faith Moses offered the Passover and applied the blood.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Passover itself was not really what God was saving them for. It was not because some blood of some lamb had been painted on a doorpost. It was that the blood of this lamb represented that the people inside the house had faith in the God that was delivering them. That was the distinction. So the whole of the Bible is a story of God looking at people and expecting them to have faith. And that's something that I think, I don't know, that, like I said earlier, the progressive dispensationalists seem to be embracing that to a point that previous dispensationalists didn't. And I'm glad to see that.
I could see that. Yeah. Because, you know, if we went to our youth groups or a lot of younger believers, hey, how, and ask the question, the $1 million question, how were people saved in the Old Testament? I wonder what the responses would be. I almost dread what the responses would be there, because you grew up in the church, and it wasn't until later in life that I realized, no, it's through Jesus Christ. It wasn't those sacrifices. It wasn't through following the law back then. I mean, another verse, what I'm the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And that, hey, that's past, present, future. No one comes to God the Father except through Jesus Christ.
Right.
Yeah. See, 12,000 from each tribe will be sent out preaching the gospel during the 7-year trib. They are brother, they are saints, but they are not the church. As a question.
Yeah, that's the Dispy view, at least.
Yeah.
So of course I don't believe that the 144,000 that are described there, I think that's Revelation 7. I don't believe that is literally the nation of Israel. And I think that they come back up. I believe they come back up. Maybe it's Revelation 14. Let me see Revelation 14, that 144,000 come back up. I don't believe that represents literal Israel at all. I take that to be a representation of the Christian church. So 12 is representative of the church in a lot of ways. Of course, it can also represent Israel. You have the 12 tribes, but you also have the 12 apostles. And so you take 12 and you square it, and just to make it larger, you make the church a whole lot larger, and you have 144, and then you multiply that by 1,000, which generally is the number of like expansive completion, which you say, well, that's rich from a premillennialist. Generally, that's what I would take it, is that represents the church, and it's expanded and grown, and it's now at its complete state in these last days, preaching the gospel throughout the entire world, as Christ promised in the Olivet discourse. I would take them certainly to represent the church. But a dispensationalist, again, their view is consistent with itself. They take Israel to mean Israel. Those are 144,000 from each of the 12 tribes. And you say, well, then, nobody in Israel knows what tribe they're from anymore. After the time of the Babylonian captivity, and especially now, none of them really know what tribe they're from. And they'd say, well, God knows. And you say, well, fair. God does know.
Yeah.
So there's this weird thing right now where, especially in the Reformed community, people are to the point now where they're starting to say that dispensationalists are not thoroughly orthodox. And that's so wrong. I think, and again, I said this earlier, I don't think we were on the air yet. There are people that I look at and I say, you guys are so wrong. And they're still thoroughly orthodox. And that's fine. I mean, I'm a Credo Baptist. If you're Presbyterian, I look at you baptizing or, sprinkling this baby and I go, that is so wrong. And they're still thoroughly orthodox. I mean, they're Christians and we're going to be in heaven together. And there's not going to be little rooms of, Presby heaven and Baptist heaven. It's, so don't want to go too hard on the dispies. I know in my speech at the conference in September, I had some people say that I went really hard after the Amillennialist. And it's not that I'm attacking Amillennialism. I'm trying to distinguish what historic premillennialists believe from Amillennialism. Because I knew that people were going to say I sounded Amil. And so when you read historic premillennialism and you're thinking, oh, well, this sounds like Amil, there's a reason. But also you got to understand these things are different in important ways, but they're all very much orthodox. The only eschatological views that are non-orthodox are those that reject clear Bible teachings. If you reject the coming of Christ, if you reject the judgment, if you reject the resurrection of the saints, you're out.
Yeah.
You're done. Of course, I would want to say, if you reject the imminent coming of Christ, then I would say you're probably out. But there could be some wiggle room on that, maybe. There's some, like the post-mill, they might not be willing to say that Christ could come tomorrow because clearly the world is not Christianized.
And I think I've heard that, from a few maybe post-millennialists, as far as the imminent return. Yeah. But, I always think of Lloyd Jones and he'll say, when we read Revelation, it's about practice and really looking to, am I living a life of holiness? Am I ready? That kind of thing. There's almost an inward component of that when we dive into these, into these things.
Yeah.
So.
All right, brother. Well, I'm going to have to hop off, but it's fantastic talking with you. And I really appreciate you guys letting me come on and talk a little bit with you, and pray for God's blessings on you and your church, and as well as Daryl, of course. But
yeah. Thanks for coming on. It was a blast, and you guys will be streaming that conference later. Is that correct?
So I don't know if it's live streaming. It'll certainly be recorded and posted, but I'd have to double check and see if it's live streamed.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely have to watch that when it comes. And thanks for stopping by. We've had every if this is your first time watching, we've had every view on except for dispensational. We need to find a brave. I could ask my pastor probably, or some others, in town. Dispensational, again, that's probably the more mainstream view out of all of them.
Yeah,
I would think. Yeah,
at the moment. Yeah.
But with that, hey guys, we will see you in the next live stream.
See you guys.